Hello, Andy Gill.
Hey Luke.
How's it going?
Yeah, it's not too bad.
So, can you tell us, who are you and where can someone find you?
I'm Andy, also known as Zephyrfish on the internet. Can be found on Twitter. I've got a YouTube channel which is ZephyrSick. I've also got a Twitter account for that which is also called ZephyrSick. And I've got a podcast which is OuijaCast on Twitter.
Tell us about your current job role and how long you've been working in the field.
So my current job role, I work as a kind of senior pen tester / kind of junior red teamer, or kind of standard red teamer. I've been in the field realistically for the last 9 years. Started out working in risk for a bank, which is boring, and then moved into pen testing. Oh yeah, I forgot this is YouTube. Oh well, it's going to have to be marked in SFW.
Why did you pick this field?
Why did I pick it? I suppose it picked me. I basically f***ed up everything at school. This is going to be so bad. I f***ed up everything at school and ended up getting into trouble, and as a result I got suggested to do hacking, and that's kind of what I've ended up doing.
What has been your experience as a job interviewee within the industry?
Good question. Interview processes are varied. It really depends what company and what job role you're kind of interviewing for. Corporates tend to be quite structured in the sense that there's a full day of interviews. You've got like group tests, all this bullshit, but realistically you don't really need it for pen testing. Then you go to actual pen test companies and you've got things like capture the flags, which tend to be like looking at web applications or infrastructure or something separate. And then you've got kind of more specialised pen test companies where they find you at a conference and go, have a job, which is always quite nice, which is how I started work for the company I currently work for.
Is there a job that stands out for you as being absolutely crazy for some reason?
Yes, a job for a previous employer. It was a web application, and the application was designed by 12-year-olds. It wasn't designed by 12-year-olds, but it felt like it was designed by 12-year-olds. There was a search box, and for some reason it was closing an SQL query. So if you put in, it was searching for names. So if you put in O'Neill, so O apostrophe Neil, it would drop all the tables in the production database. And I did that, and I got a phone call from the client, and the client was like, right, we've got a bit of a problem. Have you been doing any SQL injection? I was like, no, just searching for names in the test list. And they said, well, we've sort of lost our production database. Can you explain this? And I said, nope. I thought this application was in a dev instance. They went, oh, we did too. Our dev instance is also gone. So they lost their dev instance and their production database in the same day. And guess what? They had no backups. So that was a fun day. And I had a very awkward phone call afterwards with the developer who was explaining that it was in dev mode, and for some reason there was a symbolic link between the dev environment and the production environment, whereby when you drop the dev tables, you also drop the production tables. Knows why I didn't have backups though, because back your shit up, that's what you should do.
What is your favourite cracked password?
Butt toucher 69. Pretty great password.
You have a book. Tell me about that and why you wrote it in the first place.
Yeah, so I've got a book. I wrote it 4 years ago, primarily because one of my mates came to me and said, I want to learn about the security thing. So I started writing blog posts about learning the ropes 101, and essentially it was about breaking down security concepts for people who are a little bit technical but don't understand security that much and want to learn more. So I took those posts, and eventually, about 1.5 years down the line, so this was around about mid-2016, somebody went, why don't you write an ebook? So I kind of compiled them all together, and thus the book was born. So yeah, my co-host on the podcast, Dave Manuel, is the reason that the book exists, and it's sold over 10,000 copies. So it's pretty decent.
I hear you have another one on the way. Tell us about that.
I do, yeah. Well, after our conversation last night, I think I might have 2 on the way. The first one is in the works, which is looking at kind of surviving the industry, so building off the concepts that were introduced in the first one, which is breaking into security, learning ropes 101. The second book is going to look at kind of what to do as a pen tester, because once you're in the industry, not many people kind of give you the gotchas and the legs up, a bit awkward. But then the second book, which was actually after conversations on site look is diary of a pen tester or diaries of a pen tester, looking at kind of things that happen on site and just random shit that gets said, because it's good fun.
Is there something you wish you could tell yourself at the start of your career which would benefit you now?
Don't be afraid to ask questions. I suppose nobody knows everything, and certain like land driving tests aren't the be all and end all of everything.
Have there been any major obstacles that you've come across, and have you passed them, and how did you do it?
Yeah, actually, mental health, anxiety and depression and stuff. Quite a dark topic, but yeah, in the industry there's a severe issue around mental health and anxiety and depression and imposter syndrome, and I've experienced all three. I experience them all the time, but it's just a result of getting through it by realising that there's more out there, and it's not that bad. There's actually, like, you can speak to people, you can do all sorts of bits and pieces. Conferences get me through. It's nice to kind of socialise with people. It's not everyone's cup of tea, but it's good. It's good fun. Or a pint of beer. Tends to be what happens at conferences.
Which area of cybersecurity interests you the most?
So currently, I suppose that my interest is in offensive security, but I've started to kind of bridge the gap to learn more about defensive. So I suppose the main area that interests me is what's classified as purple teaming, which is understanding red and blue. Red and blue make purple, so defence and offence.
Tell us about your podcast.
Yeah, so I created a podcast in July called WeGcast, Ouija being short for Glaswegian. Myself and my co-host Dave, both from Glasgow, both kind of in security. Dave, not insecure, but in working security. Dave is learning the ropes, and I'm kind of a seasoned professional. Apparently I'm a professional, who knows. Yeah, so we interview people once a month, various industry professionals. I think we've interviewed 4 people so far. So we've had Neil Lyons, which is My Exploit 2600. We've had Steve Wilson, which is Automation on Twitter. We've had Freaky Clown, which is FC on Twitter. And we've just recently had Newbie Dog, which is Stu Kennedy. And they're all talking about similar questions about what you're asking me right now, actually. How they got into the industry, what interests them most, and kind of what's changed over the past, since they started. Like FC, for example, is a veteran in the field and has been in it for 20, 30 years. So yeah, it's all interesting. Just go check it out. It's at WeGcast.
Okay, so we're going to do some Twitter questions.
Okay.
So we've got @rainsec_. How did you transition from pen testing to red team, and what are the key differences? And do you have any advice for learning Active Directory, and is knowing PowerShell a key factor?
So a lot of questions in one. So starting off with the first question, how did I transition from pen testing to red teaming? The transition from pen test to red teaming is more about understanding threats and looking at MITRE attack, looking at different techniques. It's realistically, I mean, I've written blog posts about this, I'm about to speak at security about it. Red teaming isn't, you can't just walk in and do it. You need to have a bit of understanding of the industry to start with. You need to kind of do a lot of internal infrastructures to start to understand how networks fit together. You need to have a fundamental understanding of all operating systems, not just Windows environments. You need to have Mac OS, Unix, AIX, all sorts of things. And you'll only really see them by doing internal infrastructure engagements. To kind of factor in the second part of the question, what kind of tips for learning Active Directory? Directory Ranger on Twitter, at Directory Ranger, posts a lot of articles around Active Directory enumeration. It's very good. There are lots of different labs as well, so things like Rasta Labs on Hack the Box is a paid for option. There's also Offshore. They are both realistic Active Directory environments. I think they're about $90 a month. Don't quote me on that, but you can go and look them up, hackthebox.eu. So that we plug there. Yeah, from that perspective, what was the third part of the question? Is PowerShell relevant, or is it useful? I'd say knowing how to use PowerShell is useful. A lot of companies now that do red teaming and blue teaming are starting to say that PowerShell is dead because the likes of Windows 10 and AMSI, the anti-malware scanning interface, are starting to block PowerShell, and in mature organizations, PowerShell is starting to be phased out. Therefore, the attack kind of matrix, the attack matrix is starting to move to C# based payloads. So I'd say if you're wanting to learn the industry, I'd start learning C# because it's going to be useful in Windows enterprise environments.
@AppSecBloke, How is the collaboration between red and blue going in the real world? Is it generally working, or is there still them and us vibe?
I think that varies per organisation. I mean, there are some organisations that just they don't have a blue team. Therefore, when they have a pen test, when they have pen testers that come in, we come in and we wreck the house. We get domain admin within an hour or even 30 minutes, and it's because of passwords, patch policy, just security in general. Then you've got the other side of the coin where you've got very mature clients that have a very mature blue team, they have an in-house red team, and then they bring in third-party consultants. So kind of to answer the question in a nutshell, it's sort of working in the real world, but not as well as we kind of want it to be. It's got a long way to go, and it's a case of we're only as fast as our slowest person. So it's bringing every organisation up to kind of baseline.
Pre-Tech Street, how many organisations do you think have a realistic threat model, and where do they go wrong?
A realistic threat model. I'd say maybe 50%. That's going off of just the UK market. There is obviously the US, there are many markets around the world, but the UK market, I'd say 50% have an understanding of what their threat model is. They have an understanding of what their real-time risks are, so what threat actors are targeting them, what areas they have shortfalls in. The other 50%, well, they've got MSOA, they've got Windows NT4, they've got all sorts of stuff sitting. So they've got lots of fires to fight, and it's just kind of picking what fire to put out first and how you actually do it. Yeah, that's essentially.
UK Daniel Card. What's the common reason you think organisations continue to have such insecure technology deployment?
A very good question. I think the main reason that companies tend to have insecure deployment is due to poor network design and poor kind of governance and kind of policies, in the sense that you can design a network 30 years ago and just add new things every year, but if you're not patching your older things, you're just adding to the problem. Whereas if you design a secure network with security boundaries in place, proper VLAN segregation, all sorts of proper like network layer protections, then you're going to have a better understanding of what the security is. Most organizations just don't have that because the network is designed for uptime versus security. Newer businesses that are coming out now, so startups, tend to have more secure networks because they use pre-built frameworks that are already in place. You've got things like web application security, for example. I mean, most of that's around network, but web application security has come on exponentially in the last 5 years, whereby most applications deployed now use a framework that is secure by default. You're rarely going to run into SQL injection on a framework. You do find it, but it's going to be a lot rarer than like shooting fish in a barrel like it was 5 years ago, or even 10 years ago, or 20.
At Yeki1, what's the thoughts on new cybersecurity degrees? Do you feel there will be a disconnect between pen testers and IT teams, especially in terms of processes, tickets, and general empathy?
My thoughts on new security degrees. I'd say they are a good step forward, but they're not the only solution. I'd say if you're wanting to get into pen testing, 9 times out of 10 you're better off doing a generalised computing degree than you are doing a specialised security one. Because in pen testing you tend to see more complex environments that you wouldn't see set up in a lab for university. Whereas if you've done like server administration, for example, you understand how Active Directory fits together. I suppose that feeds into one of the previous questions. Look at kind of building things before you start to break them. Neil Lyons has loads of articles on his blog about creating Active Directory environments. So to answer the question about new degrees, yes, they're useful, they've got their place, but I wouldn't say they're the silver bullet. I'd say certainly have auxiliary understanding of what's going on. To add to the second part, the kind of disconnect between pen test and IT, I'd say a lot of people that I've spoken to who work in pen testing now have previously worked in a support role, either as database administrators, system administrators, IT support desk, maybe they even worked in a SOC and transitioned over to Red Team, so Secure Operations Center. A lot of people who are coming in now are just purely focused on offensive security and don't have that understanding. So yes, there is a disconnect there. And having the kind of mindset that patch all the things when you don't understand what the process is to actually do that. If you've never implemented a network, you won't understand that you can't just patch a domain controller if you've only got one domain controller and reboot it and hope for the best, because if that doesn't come back up, you've lost your network. I've currently got this problem with my home network, patching my network equipment. If I change DHCP, it goes down. If I reboot it, it doesn't come back up. It's just awful, but that's an aside fun.
What are your thoughts on security conferences?
I think they're great. I think they're a really good opportunity for meeting new people, learning new topics, and getting new employers. Never be a dick to someone, because they may end up being your employer. Likewise, you may end up hiring people at some point, so don't be a... That is the baseline of security. Don't be a dick or don't be... Depends if you speak to an American or a Scotsman. It's don't be a cunt if you're a Scotsman, don't be a dick if you're an American. And they're both interchangeable. You're going to have don't be a beep and don't be a beep.
That's what I was about to say. You think it'd be interesting if people know how you become a goon?
Yeah. You kind of get invited. It's kind of going to DEFCON. Well, I suppose what is a goon to start with? A goon is in Scotland, an idiot, but in kind of DEFCON terms, it's someone who helps out crowd control. To actually become a goon, it's kind of not interview process. It's kind of invites. You're looking at if more about who you know, and kind of if you want to become a goon, come along to DEFCON in the States, speak to goons and kind of help out. It's about kind of volunteering and just kind of showing that you actually give a shit about what's going on and helping out. Because managing 30,000 people is difficult with only 120 people or 300 people to do. So it's very chaotic.
If you could choose a totally another career path, what would that be?
Anything.
Anything at all.
A porn star. Because it's f***ing great money. That's too puns. Actually, no. A rally car driver, actually.
Why?
Because you get to go fast, you get to drive cool cars, and yeah, it's quite good fun. I really enjoy cars, so a porn star or a rally car driver, I don't know, one of the two. You can cut that together.
Okay, cool. If there's nothing else from you, then we're good.
Cool. Sounds good to me.